The David Jiricek situation in Columbus has come to a head, and it seems like a trade could happen any moment now. The former 6th overall pick in the 2022 draft has not had a smooth transition into the Columbus system, and it seems like a change of scenery is bound to happen. We got a lot of news on not just a Jiricek trade, but also which teams are the frontrunners and what a Jiricek trade could potentially look like. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trade numbers here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content and trade number content just like this all throughout the year, presented by BetUS. Speaking of which, today's video is of course sponsored by our friends over at BetUS. If you use code YouTube150 when you sign up, y'all, you'll get an 150% incentive bonus on your first deposit, and 125% incentive bonus on your next two deposits after that. But BetUS is the place to play throughout this hockey season. You got so many options. The one that I found funny going in and logging in today was the next head coach fired. This is an interesting one right now, as currently Mike Sullivan is leading with plus 150. But if you want to make other picks, you can go around through different NHL games. You can also go for the Stanley Cup winners as well. Anything you want to make picks on, BetUS is the place to do so. Now let's get into the David Jiricek trade rumors, because I find this situation fascinating. About a year ago, we talked about Jiricek in a video and his struggles with the Columbus system and his pretty outward negativity towards how he was handled. But after that draft season, we saw a lot of hype surrounding him. He would ultimately get drafted 6th overall, but for a lot of people out there, he was the best defenseman in that class. For elite prospects, I remember them having him ranked over Simone Nemec, for example, and there was a lot of potential for him going forward. Back in 2022, he was mainly playing in the top Czechia league. In 29 games, got 5 goals, 6 assists for 11 points, but really the potential stemmed from the physicality, the hockey sense, and the ability to make plays quickly, and especially with his size, using his frame in a lot of key ways, especially offensively, to shield pucks, to blast pucks through the net. He was somebody that was just aggressive in so many ways. That was really the big thing for him. Nemec in his draft year had some problems with his foot speed, with the mobility, especially on the defensive side. Sure, the physicality and the aggressiveness there was amazing, but if he wasn't able to escape pressure, then he was going to be a little bit limited in those defensive situations. And I don't think we've seen him improve on that enough to be a concentrated NHL player yet. And I think that is a reason why we've seen a lack of trust around the coaches he's had so far. As a more defensive defenseman, he hasn't quite been able to go up to that NHL speed yet to match. I think 15 years ago, Jiricek would be just fine at this point, likely in an NHL role already, but with how much faster the NHL has become, players like Jiricek are going to have a harder time adapting, and he's still just 20 years old, so it's not much of a surprise he hasn't been able to do that yet. I don't have many issues with him long term. I think he'll be just fine, but especially considering his placement in Columbus and how much he's gone up and down, I could sense some frustration there from the player side. And that's ultimately been leading to a potential trade, and it's really come to a head over the last month, as they just have not really played Jiricek in any position, whether it be in the AHL or the NHL. He finally was brought back down to the AHL this last week and getting some playing time finally, but likely more as a showcase. But as you can see from this tweet from Sportsnet 650 and Frank Saravelli talking about the situation, he says it seems like a David Jiricek move is a relative imminent transaction, something that could be processed tonight. Can tell you it's not the Canucks. But he goes on to say, since we've been talking a further update, the Blue Jackets are still going through the evaluation process. I think they've got 5 to 6 credible offers on the table that they're working through. Should happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. So now the question is, we know a Jiricek trade is likely on the table, is likely to be coming here soon. So what teams could be in the mix? Well, Elliotte Friedman has us covered. On his latest 32 Thoughts, he talked about the specific situation and some teams that could be frontrunners in the Jiricek situation, and he mentions this. Elliotte says some teams thought that may be close on David Jiricek, but he wonders how close it could be if Jiricek played on the weekend. Team is looking for another similar young player. He named the Edmonton Oilers, the Nashville Predators, the Minnesota Wild, the Philadelphia Flyers as the 4 frontrunners right now for Jiricek. Now this tweet just in general, and this tidbit was just so important, because not only do we get the teams involved for Jiricek, but also what the Blue Jackets could be looking for, because this was always kind of a curious one for me over the last week. What would Columbus even be wanting? Do they want to be improving? Do they want to go after picks and prospects? It seems like it's not necessarily one or the other, but a younger player who's in the similar timeline as Jiricek. I think it's a lot less likely for Columbus to be prioritizing picks, and especially prospects from this last draft. I don't think it's impossible for those type of assets to be included, but I think most likely you'll want to have either a younger player in the NHL now, or a player that could eventually come to the NHL either this year or next. Now, for the first team interested in Jiricek, let's talk about the Philadelphia Flyers. We had this article on Daily Faceoff from Anthony DeMarco talking about the Flyers' interest in David Jiricek, saying that trade speculation is in full swing and a lot of teams are trying to get in on the action. One of the teams interested is the Flyers, who I'm told were very close to taking Jiricek in 2022 with the 5th overall pick. They ultimately selected Gauthier, who has since been traded, and that is not a surprise. We heard a lot about Philly's interest in Jiricek leading up to the draft, especially in that last week. It seemed like Jiricek was going to be the Philly pick until Gauthier leapfrogged him in the end. But Anthony goes on to say, I'm told the Flyers have kicked tires on Jiricek, but have not made much traction in trade talks. I have no doubt that Columbus GM Don Waddell has a plethora of teams interested and perhaps is not interested in what the Flyers have to offer, but from what I've heard, the Flyers are open to moving off of any roster player not named Matthew Michkov in a deal for Jiricek. It doesn't sound like prospects Bonk and Luchenko are guys they are interested in moving off of. Now, this is interesting here. I've heard the Jackets are high on second rounder Charlie Elick, another right shot defender. Maybe they'd rather add a forward if they have a theoretical in-house replacement for Jiricek. And that is interesting because there's been a lot of mock trades out there about a potential like 1-for-1 for a younger defenseman. But there could be the situation here where Columbus is looking to add to the forward group, and we'll kind of reflect that in some of the mock trades I have here coming up. Now, throughout the rest of this video, we're not just going to go for the 4 teams that Elliot Freeman mentioned. I also have a few other bonus teams I could see being interested in Jiricek, but what we're going to do is we're going to go through every single team and go through my mock trade of what I could see a Jiricek deal looking like eventually. Now, let's talk about the team that maybe is the most talked one around Jiricek and a potential deal in the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, in any in-division trade, that means that the team that is going to be trading for a player like Jiricek is probably going to add a little bit more than they have to, so that will reflect what we see in this type of deal. But I think Columbus is going to be one to go for some younger players, and I think they're going to want a D preferably in a deal, even if they might go for a forward. And I think Philly has a few options that I think could really benefit both teams involved. Now, for the actual trade itself, I see the Philadelphia Flyers acquiring David Jiricek and that St. Louis 2025 4th rounder. In exchange, the Blue Jackets will get Morgan Frost, center, who's been scratched here and there, hasn't really found a fit with Philly and Torts, but in Columbus could find a new home there. I also see Igor Zamula as well going the other way. Big physical Russian D at 24 years old. He's somebody that last year had a breakout season, but this year hasn't been finding as much playing time and hasn't had as much trust. But I mean, considering what Columbus would want on their defense, Zamula fits that pretty well. And also a 2025 Colorado first, which I don't know, especially with Colorado trending in that right direction, how much value there is there. Eventually, I think it'll probably be in the 20s, and I think that will be a pretty natural fit. But I think this is about what we could see. Frost and Zamula are two guys that Philadelphia I don't see having much of a future in, that I think Columbus could get something out of. But really, that first rounder I think is the big one for Columbus. Getting a big pick out of that I think is still pretty important to them. But I could see them getting value out of Zamula and Frost and having them as everyday NHLers, especially in the case of Morgan Frost, who I still think has a lot of potential as a middle 6C. The next team to talk about here comes on the Western Conference side. It wasn't a surprise to see in the race, and that is the Nashville Predators, a team that absolutely is going to be trying to get everything possible in the trade market to shake up this roster. Now, Nashville's a weird one because I don't think they have a natural fit that is the perfect outcast player that they haven't been using that Columbus could swoop in and get on with a little bit lower value. But one player that I thought was interesting that I think maybe could be on his way out considering the lack of ice time compared to last season is Luke Evangelista, somebody that was playing around 13-14 minutes a night last season, and you can see in his rookie year had some pretty good point totals, 39 points, 16 goals in 80 games. This year we haven't quite seen that for Evangelista. His ice time has taken a hit, his role has taken a hit, as it seems like most of those young players in Nashville have had their roles taken a hit out of. In Evangelista's case, he's no different. As for the trade itself, I see Nashville getting David Jiricek in exchange to Columbus would be Evangelista, of course, but I don't think it would take too much more than him. I think only another pick, that 2026 Nashville 3rd rounder, I think would be enough to get the deal done. Evangelista is a good young player that just has not been able to find his role this season, but I mean could easily fit into Columbus's middle 6 immediately, especially on that right side, bringing some adaptability. I think he could be great in that role already, and again, I think he's a great player for the Blue Jackets to get back. Maybe not that premier defenseman they might want, but if they are going to be targeting a forward, Evangelista is probably one of the better ones that I could see being available. Now going on to the other Central Division team that I was not surprised to see in the Jiricek sweepstakes, that is the Minnesota Wild, who I would not be surprised if they could immediately put a spot for Jiricek on that third pair, put Bogosian more as the 7th D. I could see a situation working out there, but I think Jiricek is the exact type of physical defenseman that Minnesota will want to add to their D. Now I think a lot of people are going to mention Marco Rossi as the big chip going back to Columbus, but I just don't know how likely that is for the Blue Jackets. They already have a lot of smaller prospects, and I don't know if they're have much of an appetite to add a 5'9" centerman who has ran into his own issues with Minnesota, but I don't know why the Wild still want to trade him so badly. Sure, I don't think he's going to be the perfect first-line center for you, but I think he's still going to be very adaptable, very versatile throughout their lineup, and it's still 23 years old, what he's been able to show. He's somebody that I would keep 100% if I was Mitty, but I could see a situation where they do trade him. I just don't know if Columbus is the team to want. So keeping that in mind, I think the trade would look a little bit different than that. For what we would see Minnesota trade, of course, they would acquire David Jiricek, but I do think they would go after David Spacek, former teammates of David Jiricek, another David from Czechia. But he's somebody that I think has done pretty well adapting to the AHL, especially this season, where he's off to a pretty good offensive start in 16 games, 9 points there, and at 21 years old. That's somebody that I think Columbus could find a spot for on that right side. I also think Rasmus Kumpalainen would be a very interesting one. 6'4", 205-pound centerman, drafted 53rd overall by the Wild back in 2023, but he's somebody that has been really good after going from the OHL now back in the Liga. He's after a pretty good start with the Pelicans. In 21 games is 11 points, which for a 19-year-old at that size is pretty impressive to see. He's somebody though that just brings a lot of balance to the game, is very physical, very compact, and I could easily see Columbus wanting a centerman more up that alley, especially for that bottom six when they already have players like Fantilli and Sillinger there. I think Kumpalainen could be pretty good in that bottom six role, while I could see Columbus not wanting Rossi because of the lack of clear spot in the future. After that, I could see that Minnesota first round pick going as well. That's something that I could easily see being dealt with how well Minnesota started off this season. I don't think they'd be missing much, and also considering how good their drafting has been, if they skip out on their first round pick, they'll probably draft some other stud in the 4th round. I mean, wouldn't be surprised by that. Now we go on to the Edmonton Oilers, who were the 4th team mentioned, and this would be absolutely wild to see. I think Jiricek would be pretty fun on that defense, but considering how they've treated some of their younger defensemen like Philip Broberg over the years, I'm not too sure if Jiricek's going to be able to turn that page, but still, we'll have to wait and see on that. The big thing that I think is the hurdle in this deal is the trade value. What does Edmonton even have that Columbus will be interested in? And the answer is not much. The thing that I think really holds this deal is Bo Akey. If he is available by any means by Edmonton, which is still a question mark, then I think we could see Jiricek deal. But he's the only player that I could see Columbus really being interested in that system. People say Matthew Savoy, but I think it's going to be the same problem as Marco Rossi. I don't think they're going to want to add another purely skilled small forward into the system, and I think they're going to want to go for a D most likely if they are to make a trade, and I think Bo Akey holds the most value in the Oilers prospect pool. It would be a pretty big blow to see him go, but David Jiricek is somebody that I think could be much better than Bo Akey, even if Akey is somebody that I think is very quietly sound and sturdy, and somebody that you could see has been able to improve his puck moving ability after missing a lot of time last year. He's off to a pretty good start with Barrie this season, 15 points in 19 games. But I think it really depends on if he's available. If he is, I think it wouldn't take too much more than Bo Akey, maybe a 2nd rounder, maybe another pick on top of that, something like that. But I think Akey would have to be the big centerpiece of a deal, and it's somebody that I think could be a very solid defenseman for Columbus someday. But again, is still a ways out, which could keep a deal from happening even then. Maybe Columbus isn't even interested in him because he could take so long, and they're not sure if they have the patience for a player like that. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but I think Edmonton is still a long shot, even if they are one of the front runners as of right now. Now, I mentioned that I had a few teams out there that I could see being in the Jiricek race that weren't mentioned. One is the Ottawa Senators. Now, here's the problem is that I think Ottawa will maybe want a more NHL-ready guy to add, like a Jacob Trouba, if he's even available for them. But I think Jiricek would be a really smart addition, even though he might not be exactly what they need right now. I think he could still fill a role. And for Ottawa, they have a lot of younger players that I could really see Columbus being interested in. Jacob Bernard-Docker is something that I could see in that situation. If the Sens even want to give up Tyler Clevin, that could be an option as well. But even though the forward group, you have a player that was just brought up like Zach Ostyachuk, who I think would be a pretty interesting addition as well for Columbus. So I think Ottawa, in terms of being a trade partner, isn't getting enough respect right now, even if it might not be the perfect fit for the defense this season. we'll have to wait and see on that. But if Ottawa is still looking to add to their defense for the future, Jiricek, I think, would be a pretty smart addition. Another one from that Atlantic division, I think, is Buffalo, who is kind of in the similar spot as Ottawa, where I think more likely they'd want to add more of an NHL-ready defenseman. But if we're talking about the future, I think Jiricek fills a lot of boxes for what that Buffalo defense needs. They have a lot of puck movers right now, but not a lot of pure physicality, and Jiricek can provide that in a pretty special way. Now, it would be pretty hilarious. I don't think it's going to end up happening, but it would be pretty funny if it was Bo and Byron going back the other way after already being traded from Colorado, being swapped again. Maybe we just see a Byron for Jiricek for 1-for-1. Who knows? But I think especially for Columbus, they can maybe use some more puck moving on that defense, so maybe it's a good thing for them. But I want to know in the comments down below what you think about that. Who would you think wins? Would you even do that if you were Columbus or Buffalo? I think that would be incredible. And last but not least, I think the Montreal Canadiens should absolutely be in on this as well. I think they could use another right D for the future, and I think they're in a position where if they lose games, it's fine. If they're giving Jiricek the experience, I think that's exactly what they need, and I think he could fill a really special role for them. You already, of course, got David Reinbacher coming up, but him and Reinbacher will be two pretty good physical defensive defensemen coming up. I think could really fit some good roles for the Habs going forward. So even though I think it would probably cost a lot for Montreal to take on, I still think it could be an interesting one. Though I think maybe you would have a player like an Arber Xhekaj, or maybe a Joshua Waugh. I'm not sure where it starts for Columbus, but there's a few younger players that I could see the Blue Jackets being interested in. Him going to Montreal, though, would be special and could really make that defense elite in the future. It's already looking really good, but it would look amazing. But those are some of my ideas surrounding a David Jiricek trade, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on some of the mock trades we talked about today and what players you could see getting going and being exchanged for Jiricek going back to Columbus. And I'd love to know down below as well what you guys think about your team potentially being in the Jiricek sweepstakes. Would you trade for him? What would you trade for him? Let me know your thoughts down below, and of course hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you guys haven't already, and share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Get the Jiricek trade talk out there to them, and click on this card for all my trading room content in one playlist right there for you to binge. And I will see you guys in the next one. Sign up to BetUS today as well using code YouTube150, and hopefully you guys have a fantastic hockey day. Goodbye.